Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, the genesis of the universe. One-way trip from the desert to Hell City. Part 2, the illusion of safety. The desert had plunged into silence. There was nothing quite like the radiance of the sunset. The sky was becoming stained in a blood red. The sand was still. Only the trails of two people twisted and turned in that endless plain. They reached the foot of a sand dune. There ended the tracks, and there Jotaro, Polnareff and Iggy fell to the ground, exhausted. The battle against Satanic Coupler had drained their energy to the last drop, but they still had to try to keep going, maybe east, where all these dunes were scattered. Of course, they already knew what they would see when they climbed to the top of the dune. However, if they didn't set a goal, their feet wouldn't move another step. They moved 50 meters and stopped, another 100, and they fell on their knees exhausted. After an hour and many kilometers of walking, they found themselves at the foot of a dune, and there at their limits, they threw themselves onto the sand like cut down trees. Jotaro's eyes were not yet completely closed. His vacant stare turned towards two mountains that reminded him of his mother's bosom. The two hills sat beside each other like women's breasts, and meanwhile a particularly bright star shone in the sky. "Where have I seen a similar landscape?" mumbled Jotaro in a state of half-consciousness. Two hills and a shining star. A sign that reminded him of his childhood years. Yes, it was just like this. Looks like a book illustration. A book I read when I was a little kid. A book my mother bought for me for my 6th birthday. It was The Little Prince. I remember that page 2 was a picture very similar to this landscape. Of course, that little prince crashed in this place to then leave for his star. The author had written, "The place is the same as that on the preceding page, but I have drawn it again to impress it on your memory. Look at it carefully, so that you'll be sure to recognize it in case you travel some day to the African deserts." Yes, this could be that place. Of course, at my age, I can't really believe the little prince has embarked on his journey starting from here. But this place isn't much different from the original. If I searched the deserts of the whole world far and wide, I'm sure that I would never ever find a landscape more similar than this. Travelling all the time doesn't make much sense, but it's always enriching. It's as if every time I went in search of where the little prince took place. If my mother had revealed where it was, I would have jumped up and down with joy, but I'm somewhat shy, which is why I've never read that book in front of her. That habit was reserved for my moments of solitude. I recall that I read and reread it non-stop, sinking into the realm of dreams. I was a brat. I didn't say very smart things at that age, but of one thing I was sure. I absolutely loved that book. It may seem absurd, but that book really touched my heart. My mother never saw me with the book she gifted me in hand, and this left her very disheartened. If I'd known I'd die like this, I would have been happy to read it in front of her at least once. After all, it would have been filial piety. My mother. Yeah, if I don't make it, she'll die. But right now, death doesn't terrify me. We got away. These days, we've been holding up well. We faced death with determination, and we can't complain of the result, I'm sure. It would annoy me if that bastard Absalom won. It would annoy me if we didn't make it to Dio. I'll be particularly angry if I don't manage to save my mother from death. If I were to have any regrets. No, my only regret is that I couldn't save my mother. I no longer have the strength to stand. I'm really sorry, but this is it. This. Uttering these words, Jotaro dozed off. But after a short while he became aware of his reduced sight, that something moved in the distance. He raised his heavy and weary eyelids, and turned his gaze to the top of the hill. There was a small boy up there. No, I can't believe it. The little prince showed up. Grandpa had warned me. The victims of the desert before dying start having hallucinations. Has my time come? The little prince has showed up. And not just that, he looks an awful lot like the book illustrations. While the little prince changed clothes, he slid down the dune, addressing Jotaro in a strange and incomprehensible foreign tongue. There, now I started having auditory hallucinations, thought an upset Jotaro, closing his eyes. But that was not an auditory hallucination, and the little prince was also not a hallucination. In that moment, Jotaro had the faint sensation of being touched by shaky fingers. The little prince was a young desert nomad. Even in the past, Oasis had revealed to be kind to mankind. People knew only arid deserts, and upon finding the peacefulness of an oasis, would quickly build there a village. Obviously, the motive was the water. That's why when victims of the desert arrived at an oasis, they immediately came back to their senses. In this case, even they weren't an exception, seeing that they were about to die of thirst. The nomad that discovered Jotaro's group quickly returned to tell the village. It was 30 minutes away on foot beyond the dune, above which the small silhouette could be seen in the distance. Jotaro, Polnareff and Iggy were brought to the village, and there avidly drank fresh and clean water, just pumped from an old stone well. The villagers tried through gestures to tell them to drink slower, but they, paying no heed to the advice, continued to gobble it down. That water was of a unique delicacy. No other elaborate culinary art in the world could rival its excellence. Cooking is certainly a joy, but the water of that oasis flooded their bodies with a feeling of delight that went far beyond palate. In the blink of an eye, as if by magic, they regained physical and mental vigour, like how withered grass comes back to life after being watered. "I didn't remember water being so good!" exclaimed Polnareff, as he stared emotionally at the aluminium bowl filled to the brim. "I'll never get tired of drinking. If someone came up to me and jokingly said that the water in the aqueduct is putrid, I'd beat the crap out of him." The roasted lamb meat they were offered by the locals was incredibly delicious. Jotaro found it beyond comparison. He thought it wonderful. Jotaro, Polnareff and Iggy were eating and drinking avidly, and in no time recovered 60% of their energy, previously at their limit. "Thanks seems to be the least we can do. Everything's delicious. Thanks to you, we've escaped certain death," Jotaro said, turning to the village elder, the only one who could speak English. He learnt it during the Second World War. The old man gave a small nod with his head to indicate approval, and called Jotaro and his companions to warm up near the fire. What was that? Some sort of custom in honour of those fallen in the desert? Or were they simply gathered round the fire? Jotaro and Polnareff took a look around them. The people of dark skin wore white tunics and were particularly taciturn. They seemed preoccupied and at the same time suspicious. The bonfire's flames cast deep shadows on their faces, heightening even more that atmosphere of prudence. Jotaro thought that whoever had lived silently and at length in a cruel place such as the desert world would, in the end, inevitably wear an expression of that kind. "Seems like Absalom isn't here," Polnareff whispered in Jotaro's ear. "Yeah, seems so," muttered Jotaro. "If he lived here, he wouldn't have offered us water and meat. He could have killed us on sight." Jotaro and Polnareff took their places beside the village elder. All sat around the bonfire, still watching the unfortunate newcomers with suspicion. "They don't say a word," said Polnareff, warily observing the scene presented before them. "How can someone live in such condition? There are no cars, no phones, no washing machines, no gas stoves. There's no sign of civilization." "For that matter, they don't even have electricity," Jotaro added sharply. "It's like time has stopped in prehistory. They have water, food, and houses, but everything else is just sand. Who knows how many places like this there are in the world? Spots where nothing exists apart from the men inhabiting them. Just think about it for a moment, and many others come to mind." Jotaro completely shared Polnareff's opinion. Life in the village didn't seem to differ much from that in prehistory. It felt like they had willingly kept living in the Stone Age, preventing progress from taking place. Lined up around the bonfire, the kitchen utensils, aluminium cups and bowls showed how little progress had influenced life in the village. "Go ahead, drink. You'll feel better," said with a slight smile the old man with wrinkled skin, offering aluminium cups to Jotaro and Polnareff. Each took his own and shared a look, filling their mouths with the thick greyish liquid swaying at the bottom. Immediately, Polnareff spit it out and shouted, "What is this stuff? What a terrible taste!" "It's medicine," the old man replied, laughing. "It's a miraculous medicine of our making. Its benefits are wonderful. That's why we keep making it for 100 years now. By the way, it is obtained from the desert lizard." No, I'm good. I don't want to hear another word," said Polnareff, waving his arms and cutting off the old man's words. The elderly man, amused, burst into thunderous laughter. By then, the cautious stares of the village inhabitants finally softened. "What do you want? It's been more than 5 years since the last time foreigners came to visit us," said the old man, turning to his neighbours. "To everyone, you're so unusual there's no helping it. I find it troublesome, but please be patient, because this is an uncivilized village with nothing going on." "Well, I thought of saying, take a good look and see if you like this face. We mean no harm." The old man translated what Polnareff said into the local language. Among the villagers there was a general low laughter. Immediately after, the old man, puzzled, took a look at Iggy, who was chewing on a lamb bone under the caves of a rough masonry house. "But back to you. How did you ever end up in this place? Have you run out of clothes suitable for crossing the desert, or did you go a bit too far in walking your dog?" "Would you believe it if we told you that we were chased by a ghost train?" "Surely," was the old man's cold-blooded response. "We," Jotaro added, "had come to find a friend that lives somewhere in this desert. But along the way our car broke down, and later we were also taken by surprise by a sandstorm. That's all." "Ah, a friend." The old man translated into the local language what Jotaro said for the villagers, then turned again to him with a mirthful expression. "And who is this friend?" "Absalom." There was a commotion among all the villagers. "Why, you know him, Gramps?" Jotaro asked, ready to bombard him with questions. "But surely," accused the old man, "he used to live in this village not too long ago." You don't say!" Jotaro and Polnareff barely held back their surprise. "But the same Absalom who loves railways and trains?" "Exactly. And so you should be the friends who shared his passion and of whom he talked at length." "I suppose so." "Good." The old man gave a pleased smile. "Well, Absalom will be surely thrilled by your visit." "Indeed. Now, where is he?" "If you walk for around 2 hours towards north, you'll find him at a small oasis with his sister Michal." "Sister?" Jotaro thought back to Absalom and the stand as a girl. "Poor Absalom. We should pity him," whispered the old man, saddened. "After losing both his parents in an accident in Cairo, he changed radically. He moved away from the village with his sister. From 4 years ago, we've barely ever seen him." 4 years ago? In Cairo? That might be the year and place of Dio's return, thought Jotaro. But what happened to him 4 years ago? Jotaro asked with the utmost caution. The old man pondered for a bit, then, with a gentle smile, looked Jotaro in the eyes. "Might as well tell you. You're his friend, so it's best that you know. All the more so if you come from the civilized world." All the while, the wood kept crackling in the bonfire. The sky was teeming with stars, and among these an immaculate full moon stood out. It shone so bright it seems you could reach out and touch it with a finger. The old man, squinting his eyes as if he were focusing on something on its surface, slowly began to tell, word by word. "Absalom is 20 years old. His younger sister, Michal, is 16. In fact, she probably just turned 17. Once they both lived in this village with their parents. The two got along so well as with their parents, that it could make anyone envious. Absalom, since he was little, has always been a clever boy and has one single flaw, that of having such a big and persistent curiosity. He would often stop adults to ask questions such as, why doesn't the moon fall, or how much sand is in the desert, bothering them. By contrast, Michal, due to being extremely shy, was a girl who spoke little, but her wonderful features were Absalom's pride. The two siblings had a passion for mirages. Whenever they had free time, they'd go together side by side to peacefully watch them. Michal felt enchanted by the Mirage's magic atmosphere. Absalom's hobby, however, was exclusively about the civilizations of the many countries reflected in the Mirages. This was because, be it the cities, the factories, or the ships as large as mountains, all were full of charm and mystery, which was more than enough to capture the heart of a boy. In young Absalom's eyes, the civilized world was as marvelous as that of magic. The tales that he occasionally collected from caravans and travellers that stopped by the village constantly spurred him on. Beyond the desert is the land of happiness, more commonly known as civilization. There stretched dream-like landscapes. Absalom thought so. Buildings tall enough to reach the clouds, roads in the sky, steel pipes in which water flowed endlessly. Thousands of people travelling down two parallel paths aboard large iron vehicles. It was the trains. What captured his interest was not the civilized world at large, but the railways and the trains. Those were what stole his heart. For him, the trains were the heroes created by human wisdom and embodied the symbol of civilization. Well, that in itself wasn't a problem at all, but the issue was, as he grew up, his admiration for the civilized world increased significantly, until it became his only faith. He believed it with all his heart. When he met civilization, he would become a happy person. Rather, only in the civilized world could mankind know happiness. Meanwhile, as he loved the modern world, he started feeling extremely ashamed of the life he led in the desert. I, too, was worried. I told Absalom many times, "No, Absalom, you still don't know the true face of civilization. In the desert exists the day and the night, while in modern civilization what seems to shine may hide a dark side. If you limit yourself to simply gazing at its best side, you'll never fully appreciate the modern world." If, in that moment, he'd paid only a bit of attention to what I said, maybe that tragedy of 4 years ago wouldn't have happened. It's already been 4 years since that regrettable and unfortunate incident. The incident in Cairo, where he lost both his parents, which you mentioned earlier? Polnareff asked the old man. Exactly so. Absalom was 17 back then, but was already plenty obstinate. Actually, in the end, his parents, giving in to his nagging requests, took him to Cairo alongside his sister Michal. Absalom, needless to say, was in heaven, essentially being able to visit his so-beloved civilized world. He'd been waiting for that moment for a long time. But destiny was cruel, very cruel. I don't know the exact details. I know only that the bus on which they travelled stopped on a level crossing, and shortly after arrived the moving train. I'm sure of this. Both parents died on impact. Absalom broke his legs. Michal, instead, was on the brink of death from a metal splinter that tore her throat. But that's not all. Those who rushed to help gave priority to the locals and to those who offered rewards. Absalom and Michal, who were outsiders, were left for last. Needless to say that medical help came too late for Michal. Sure, she managed to escape death, but from then on she could no longer speak. Trains, the passion he held from a young age, what ended up killing both his parents and depriving his beloved sister from her voice. Modern society had taken away his happiness. The civilized world he so loved hadn't revealed itself to be some magical land nor a land of fortune. On the contrary, it was a city of demons for the unfortunate. Remembering it still pains me. That tragedy changed Absalom down to his core. The modern world in his eyes was a wretched delusion, and from then on he could no longer put a lid to the contempt he began to harbour towards it. A hate 100 times greater than his love. 6 months later, when he returned to the village, he was a completely different person. He seemed a ghost. And by then he had lost all faith in the civilized world. He strongly detested it. But this did not fully bring about a reconciliation with life in the desert. Poor Absalom. In his eyes dealt a strange, menacing light, and his shape wasn't the best, but energy still poured from all his pores. In Cairo, he had been helped by someone who convinced him of being a chosen one.
"Wasn't that man by any chance called Dio?" asked Jotaro.
Yes, Dio. His name was Dio. Or at least that's what Absalom called him, and so he kept saying before leaving the village. I have found a new deity in Cairo that has nothing to do with the civilized world. It's an almighty god Dio for whom I have a deep respect. That man has restored Michal's voice, thus fulfilling a wish of mine. I will owe him for the rest of my life. In the end, we survived thanks to him, he said. By no means it sounded like a sane speech. Michal's throat could have been cured by God. I suppose the organs that make the voice were completely removed. Just being alive in God's blessing. The villagers are convinced this so-called Dio was either made up in Absalom's head or some terrible braggart. But I still admire him, whoever Dio is. Absalom has grown very fond of him, and he restored his peace. He became Absalom's support. How could you blame him? Modern civilization betrayed him, took away both his parents and almost his sister's voice as well. His morale was shattered, but some way or another, he was able to make it, thanks to that Dio that now has a place in his heart.
At that point, the old man's tale ended. Jotaro and Polnareff, speechless, stared at the medicine shimmering at the bottom of the aluminium cups. The bonfire's flames scattered all round. The old man sighed and began to speak again.
It's not that I renounce progress. I simply have the feeling people are poisoned by it. Naturally, you civilized men don't appreciate the desert and surely don't compare an oasis to a city. But this village and its people, in their own way, don't wish for the winds of modernity to blow in. I think that only those who ignore civilization can be happy. And Absalom's tragedy is evidence of that.
Nice speech, said Polnareff, holding out the aluminium cup before the old man's eyes. And what is this? Is it not perhaps a modern utensil? The elder, amused, burst into a thunderous laughter and went to drink the coffee from his own cup.
Well, in truth, it doesn't rust. It's unbreakable and also handy, but I don't think that this cup incarnates the worst side of civilization.
I get it. It's not corrupted enough. After all, it is yours, Polnareff added, making fun of him. There's some theory which claims that the liquid that aluminium utensils release is a dangerous substance, probably the cause behind Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's? Never heard of it, but the medicine I made you drink also works on foreign diseases.
I'd like to believe it, Polnareff replied, humming. Meanwhile, the old man toyed with the aluminium cup between his hands, staring silently at the bonfire.
Anyway, I was saying that in this world, those who ignore reality are their happiness. If you don't want to spoil the desires you've grown in your heart, might as well ignore reality and be happy anyway.
So it could be anything, said Polnareff with an interested look,
making himself comfortable. The old man turned his gaze to Jotaro. Then, letting an affectionate smile escape, he squeezed his hands tightly. Absalom has changed. I don't know if it'll please him to meet you civilized people, even if you're his friends. Whatever happens, I beg of you to forgive him. Do it for me. Even if he were to be unpleasant.
We'll do what we can. Jotaro turned away from the old man's gentle smile.
In that moment, Absalom and Michal were hiding north of the oasis, and Satanic Coupler was finishing its umpteenth metamorphosis. Its metallic and aerodynamic shape resembled the TGVA high-velocity train of SNCF, the National French Railway Company, that on May 9th of 1990 had achieved the speed world record, reaching 515.3 kilometers per hour. Nowhere could the rough and angular features of the previous model be seen. It matched Absalom's aesthetic tastes. In fact, those sword horns that protruded from the pilot and the sharp spines growing out of the convoy here and there had remained intact. He moaned with a satisfied look.
Thanks to you, Satanic Coupler's been revived in excellent shape, incarnate in the latest model, exclaimed Absalom, arrogantly turning to Joestar, Kakyoin, and Abdul. They remained attached to the ground, wrapped by tentacles which still left their right hands free. And right in these, Michal, afraid, handed them a piece of cheese and a bowl of water.
What are you up to?
Michal curled up, terrified by Joestar's intense look.
We don't want to poison you, Absalom reassured him. I've decided I'll let you live until tomorrow.
What are you insinuating?
Tomorrow I'm thinking of making you witness how Satanic Coupler will torture Jotaro and Polnareff to their deaths. A train journey to mark the end of their lives. The view from the car windows will have some changes. And naturally, after having some fun, we'll ask our guests to set out on a one-way trip to Hell City.
At his maniacal laughter, Joestar and the others felt a shiver run down their spines.
To make an attempt on the great Lord Dio's life is an extremely foolish act. Tomorrow I'll kill all you rotten civilized people, as a debt of gratitude to Lord Dio, and on behalf of Michal and myself.
Do you believe so? Abdul cut in, chuckling ironically. That might be for you, but that girl beside you, Michal, doesn't look like she's too eager for tomorrow's event. At least, that's what my eyes see. The girl was about to say something, but she lowered her face, dejected.
Quiet! Michal's my sister! We're a unit!
With that, Absalom dug his shoe tip into Abdul's side. Absalom watched the coughing Abdul with hatred, but Michal, frail and frightened, didn't make any effort to raise her head. In the evening, Michal's stand couldn't manifest itself. There weren't any mirages on the horizon, and consequently, there wasn't even the possibility for her stand to build mirage cities. Meanwhile, Jotaro and Polnareff were focusing on what was the best strategy to take down Absalom once and for all, and to rescue Joseph and the others, who'd remained in his clutch. They considered the idea of a nocturnal attack. However, only needing a look to understand each other, they decided to leave the village the morning of the next day, after a good night's rest. Even if they had recovered their physical and spiritual strength, it was just at 60% capacity. To be able to defeat Satanic Coupler, one should have been at least 100% of their physical condition. Joestar and the others were their main worry, and the only way to rescue them was victory. Jotaro and Polnareff fell asleep in an old shed of coarse bricks, enraptured by a starry sky that invaded the place through a crack in the roof.
The moment has come, but how will we save them? Asked Polnareff. What's the plan, Jotaro?
I don't know, replied Jotaro. We'll talk about it as we go. The first move is to save Gramps and the others anyway.
And after that?
We'll improvise. It'd be troublesome to be trapped inside, but the outer wall of Satanic Coupler is pretty much the same as an ordinary stand. In that case, we should be able to come up with something. The problem is, how are we going to get that guy into our stand's range? Or better, how close we need to get. After all, for his size, he's a terribly fast-moving bastard. This will be doable. So far, we've managed to solve things as we go. You can say that again.
Silence reigned in that room for a few moments. An instant later, Polnareff mumbled, "What do you think about what the old man said?"
"What?" was Jotaro's sharp reply. Yeah. I think that both Absalom and Michal have probably received a stand from Dio."
"No, I wasn't talking about that. Don't you find Absalom's story weird?"
"How so?"
"I mean, it's curious. Absalom should be mad at trains. After all, they killed his parents. Instead, would you look at that? He manipulates a diesel locomotive stand. Rather taking advantage of our brains, he even enhanced it, scrupulously painting it like one of the latest models. No matter how you look at it, it's no different from a railway enthusiast giving his train model a new coat of paint or using sandpaper to give it a glossy finish. Don't you think it's a big contradiction?"
In the end, I suppose he never cast away his admiration for civilization.
"What are you getting at?" Polnareff sat up to scrutinize Jotaro, however the latter turned in bed and, annoyed, faced the other way.
Surely what happened in Cairo must have been quite the trauma which changed his mindset. But his passion for trains didn't just fade. He both hates and loves civilization at the same time. Of course it's a contradiction, but it's always his conscience. After all, it's a considerable psychological trauma. It's difficult to be coherent in these kinds of moments.
"Without a doubt. It must have been hard. Worse, he must suffer terribly. Poor guy. I feel pity for him. Even if he's one of Dio's underlings, even if he's tried to kill us, I really do feel pity for Absalom," thought Jotaro.
Anyway," Polnareff said, yawning. "Is there anything else?" Jotaro asked, irritated. "I don't think we're on a school trip. I'm not planning on staying up all night chatting."
"You're so irascible. This is the last thing, I swear. Actually, somewhere in the village I must have dropped my pass case. That's where I usually keep girls' phone numbers, so it would be really bad if I can't find it."
"Whatever you say." Jotaro brusquely got up and went outside.
In the sky shone a silvery moon, while the desert embraced its reflection. In Jotaro's heart, a little mark of compassion for Absalom took form. I hope this won't have an influence in the fight. But no matter how much Jotaro stared at the desert lit by that silvery light, no reply came to placate that apprehension of his. The morning sun coloured with silver the horizon line to the east. The desert released the humidity accumulated during the night in the air, and a warm wind made the panorama waver slightly. "Be careful, and on the way back, make sure to come visit again," the old man said, handing a leather sack containing water and dried meat to Jotaro and Polnareff.
"We won't fail to, and we will bring our 3 friends with us."
Turning their backs on the oasis, they resumed the trip. The desert was monotonous and desolate as always, but for Jotaro, Polnareff and Iggy, fully recovered, it no longer constituted a threat. "In 2 hours we'll be in the middle of a battlefield, and this battle will never end in a draw. For the losing side, there's only death." While the vital energy began to flow inside their bodies, the 3 advanced towards north, where the oasis in which they would have found Absalom and Michal was. Fortunately, there was no mirage in sight. They wouldn't appear until the sun rose to some extent. Therefore, for a few hours after the sunrise, there was no reason to worry about mirage cities. Of course, if the battle were to become drawn out, the time when mirages can appear would arrive, but they settled that matter with, "We'll get there when we get there." At the moment, the most important thing was to safeguard their own physical conditions, now that they were restored. During the itinerary, Jotaro explained to Polnareff the plan of action he had elaborated the previous night. "It's not a bad idea, aiming at the train's coupler. Clever!" shouted Polnareff after learning the strategy.
"The couplers are the pivot of the whole train. If we knock out that, the cars will drift apart from each other.
This way we'll split Satanic Coupler's locomotive from the passenger's car, where Jost are and the rest are.
I get it, but since those are fundamental parts, maybe Absalom's chosen really sturdy first-quality components. We should give up the idea of destroying them by force. In the remote hypothesis that the mechanism of the hook is the same as that of real trains, then Star Platinum should be able to intervene without any problem.
But at that speed it won't be easy to get close. There, I'll make an entrance. I'll move around Satanic Coupler to grab his attention. What do you think?
Seems like a game plan.
Well, we're a team. At this point we're on the same wavelength, no? Jotaro and Polnareff started mentally simulating the plan of action in every detail while they continued to walk. When they finished, their attention was grabbed by a cloud of dust that rose on the horizon in the distance. A sandstorm? Oh, I don't think so. Something's happening over there. Polnareff clenched his fists and became tense. A ship? A dune buggy? No, that's not possible. Whatever it was loudly moving forward, lifting a cloud of sand. An aerodynamic and metallic body, a hysteric siren rissing as much as it could, headlights of a crazy red, and a pair of saw-toothed frontal pincers that opened and closed, making a terrible noise. It's Satanic Coupler! Yelled Polnareff. It has changed again! It goes a lot faster than earlier! Polnareff's observation was correct. Satanic Coupler, beyond appearances, had been created by taking inspiration from the model and performance of the TGVA. Its speed certainly exceeded 500 kilometers an hour. So, you're still alive, Jotaro and Polnareff. I thought you would have hidden in some oasis in the south, taking advantage of your smart move the other day. Well, right today, you'll be victims of my Satanic Coupler. While the despicable and angered voice of Absalom boomed, Satanic Coupler charged in the direction of Jotaro, Polnareff and Iggy. They managed to dodge it by a hair. However, Satanic Coupler's supersonic speed generated a shockwave, which hurled them high in the sky like they'd been hit by a giant invisible hand. They landed sliding on the sand, and once again Satanic Coupler furiously charged against them. It was like a missile, flying close to the ground. The group suddenly recovered, only to throw themselves to the side once more. A huge shockwave hit their backs, their clothes flapping violently, but they didn't suffer any damage. Good, we avoided it. That shockwave is nothing to be afraid of. All right, time to put Polnareff's game plan into action. The moment in which Jotaro thought that, he heard Polnareff's horrified scream. Ah! Look over there! A young boy was standing, blocking the way of Satanic Coupler that was advancing at top speed in the desert. The boy opened his eyes wide, stunned and frightened. Watch out! Just as Polnareff shouted, the boy was hurled by Satanic Coupler so hard that Jotaro heard the thud. Absalom, disgusted, clicked his tongue and stopped Satanic Coupler diagonally. The boy twirled in the air like paper scraps and his blood started to fill the gashes dug by the wheels. From his hands bounced a black squared object that appeared to repeat the trajectory of the boy. Jotaro and Polnareff approached in a hurry. From his lips spurted out a rivulet of blood. His eyes were rolled back into his head and he had heavy convulsions. That boy was the little prince, the one who had rushed to Jotaro's and his friend's aid the previous day. It's my pass case, Polnareff whispered in shock, grabbing that square black object from the boy's hands. This boy came all the way here just to give it to me. Polnareff glared furiously at Coupler, determined to deal with it at once, but the voice of Jotaro prevented him from doing so. Polnareff, take this kid back to the village. He's in urgent need of medical care. Polnareff stopped suddenly, and for a moment hesitated between the bleeding boy and Satanic Coupler, who had atrociously altered his features. Come on! This little prince was our saviour! His worrying condition left Polnareff no room for doubt. You go back. I'll fight to avenge him, he said without leaving any chance for a reply. Got it, Jotaro. At least try to hold out until my return. Polnareff picked up the boy
and began heading south towards the village. Jotaro followed him with his gaze until he vanished on the horizon. Then he carefully got up, shaking off the sand from his knees. The diesel engine of Satanic Coupler was idling, ready to charge at Jotaro and Iggy.
This leaves a bad taste in my mouth, but I must turn back on my word. It's too bad, but it doesn't seem like the old man's wish will be fulfilled, muttered Jotaro with his eyes cast downward.
What are you mumbling on about? Did the fear mess with your head?
Absalom's sneer filtered through the speakers.
Absalom, why do you do this? I heard that both of your parents died, crushed by a train. You hate the modern world and you want to kill us. I don't exactly know why, but now I'll give you a good lesson. Answer me! Why do you act like this?
Jotaro lifted his head abruptly. It was as if a laser beam, sharp and blood-curdling as a flash of lightning, had released from his eyes and, crossing Satanic Coupler's windscreen, pierced those of Absalom and Michal inside the driver's cabin. Michal was left petrified, with her gaze paralysed by fear, and Absalom immediately sat back down. An intrepid fighting spirit with murderous intentions made its way into Jotaro's body. You bastard. You just pulled off the same accident that happened to your parents, the thing you hate the most. Worse, that kid isn't one of the civilized people you detest. He was one of yours.
What are you insinuating? Said Absalom with insolence through gritted teeth. Who or what I hurt doesn't concern me. I don't belong to the civilized world, nor to the desert. Thanks to Lord Dio, we had the opportunity to embark on a journey into a third new world.
And the destination's Hell City. There's not a single place in the world where you'll be able to catch your breath, except that.
What?
The veins on Absalom's temples bulged. Jotaro, spitting out the sand that got in his mouth, coldly replied,
I pity you a bit, but you made me get past it. You're the lowest of scum. You're a bastard. And you deserve to rot.
Shut your mouth! Crat, 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 crat!
Absalom, seized by a fit of wickedness, pushed the engine of Satanic Coupler to the max, the wheels screeching, scattered blinding sparks everywhere. Jotaro found himself face down on the ground to avoid the powerful shockwave, and Iggy, with a leap, hid in a pocket.
Yada yada. This is going to be a troublesome fight.
He watched Satanic Coupler turn around like a drifting car. It was clear he was about to hunt them down again.
Now that Polnareff isn't here, I can't carry out our game plan of damaging the coupler,
Jotaro muttered, dejected. In that instant, he saw the project he came up with the night before shattering into pieces. And the plan B? Frankly said, it didn't exist.
I'm seething. This is driving me up the wall. I'm just here watching my grandson in a crisis, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it.
Joestar blurted out, watching the scene from the window of Satanic Coupler.
Awful,
said Abdul, ardently clenching his fists, dripping with sweat.
Jotaro's movements are getting slower and slower, while Satanic Coupler's attacks are meticulous.
Joestar and the others were still prisoners in the clutches of the tentacles, therefore it was impossible for them to freely move in the carriage. Every time Satanic Coupler reversed its direction, it brutally swung from right to left, and they were forced to hold onto the backs of the seats. They then carefully watched an imposing Jotaro, who slowly consumed all his energies, like watching a mouse being chased by a cat. Jotaro! Is Jotaro not trying to fight back? Kakyoin, without his sight, nearly found himself falling onto Joestar.
No. Jotaro must have something in mind. He's attempting to somehow reach Satanic Coupler. The range of his Star Platinum is 2 meters, but it will be difficult for him to be that close. The spines coming out of the car will impede him.
Is it that difficult, getting near this Satanic Coupler?
Just think about it for a second, Joestar said, irked. It's like a sumo match between a Shinkansen and a human. Although you might have a stand, don't you think it's a colossal challenge all the same to be able to jump on board a running train?
Yes, there's no doubt, Kakyoin stammered.
Besides,
Not only does Satanic Coupler run faster than the Shinkansen, but it's also a hellishly terrifying machine that brings together the agility of a car during turns and the acceleration of a motorcycle. If Jotaro doesn't move away immediately, he'll get crushed.
No way! Shouted Kakyoin. Isn't there anything I could do, Mr. Joestar?
I've tried everything I could think of, but there's no way to escape!
Joestar held a violent fist against the window, but the glass, absorbing the shock, expanded, stretching towards the exterior, as if to mock his impatience. In the meantime, Jotaro had fallen prey to restlessness, since he couldn't throw himself at Satanic Coupler. His uniform had begun to suffer gashes here and there, and on his skin blood had started to spread. Every time he was about to toss himself near the train coupler, the quills that popped out from Satanic Coupler ripped through his body. Meanwhile, Iggy kept hidden in the spacious pocket of the school uniform, attempting to save his energy. For Jotaro, there was no more time to lose, therefore he grabbed him by the scruff.
You don't look well, eh, Jotaro? Who was the lowest kind of vermin? Who was the one supposed to go to Hell City? You're old bark and old bat. You only make me laugh.
He's stronger than an enraged bull. I won't be able to resist this brutal battle until Polnareff comes back, thought Jotaro as he listened to Absalom's insults. Satanic Coupler, fuming like a bloodthirsty dragon, threw itself against Jotaro some 10 times. Jotaro managed to avoid the attacks, but on the 10th time, due to fatigue, he was grazed on the side by one of the spikes, and cried from the pain.
Jotaro!
Yelled Joestar. Jotaro tumbled to the ground and rolled to the side. Blood began to pour from his fingers, and slowly the sand was tainted red. Satanic Coupler kept speeding through the desert to deal the killing blow upon Jotaro, and skidded into a large arched curve.
Die, Jotaro!
Absalom turned the throttle to the max. Satanic Coupler was now going at full speed, the pincers that protruded from the pilot spread wide. Having exited the curve, Satanic Coupler's windshield caught a struggling Jotaro, trying to move away. However, there were 2 Jotaros. Pressing the injured and bloodied side, a grimace of terrible pain appeared on their faces, but still with a sharp glint in the eyes, the Jotaros scowled at Satanic Coupler, standing side by side.
What's that?
Absalom quickly turned his head right and left, looking at the 2 Jotaros alternately. However, the 2 Jotaros had the same characteristics and took the same stance. Still, the Jotaro on the right had somewhat funny-looking features, but Absalom, confused, didn't notice that.
Am I hallucinating? Have I gone mad?
Absalom looked at Michal, bewildered. She scrutinized the scene in front of her, terrified, with her doe eyes like dinner plates.
If you see them too, it means there's not a hallucination. But I'm one step away from victory. I can't have hallucinations. It must be a trick. It must surely be another Japanese like Jotaro. Maybe he's putting into practice the invisibility technique that apparently has been passed on in Japan since ancient times.
While Absalom became more and more perplexed, Satanic Coupler was quickly getting closer to the 2 Jotaros. They, in turn, started to run in opposite directions. Absalom still hadn't located the target, but unconsciously, he pushed the pedal of the brakes. The speed of Satanic Coupler considerably decreased.
Which is the real Jotaro?
After a moment of hesitation, Absalom noticed the funny-looking Jotaro was slightly slow in his movements, so he decided to turn Satanic Coupler to the right. At this point, the Jotaro on the left had complete freedom of action, and certain would have let the only good opportunity in his life slip by. He took a running start, and with a supersonic dash he squeezed through the space between the locomotive and the passenger car. In the meantime, the spikes completely destroyed the Jotaro on the right, who, split in 2, disintegrated, releasing a cloud of sand into the air.
But that's a dog stand!
Shouted a surprised Absalom. The Jotaro on the right was Iggy's the Fool that, taking advantage of Absalom's momentary distraction, had taken the shape of Jotaro. Iggy usually didn't listen to humans' orders. He had an insolent soul, and only when his life was in serious danger did he devise an astonishingly clever plan. He was still a dog, but this was the reason which made Joestar want to bring him along in the journey. Now, with this action, he had wonderfully proved his true abilities.
Many thanks, Iggy. Later I'll give you as much coffee chewing gum as you want. In the meantime, Jotaro had slipped into the precarious intercommunicating space between the locomotive and the passenger car, and there he had manifested his Star Platinum. The coupler was in the immediate vicinity. The eyes of Star Platinum had rapidly located the mechanical device. It didn't differ much from those of the original trains, and the individual parts had been assembled with some bolts. It's like I thought. Normally it would be difficult. With the ultra-precise movements of Star Platinum, it would be a piece of cake to take them apart, blow by blow, Jotaro evaluated. Therefore he ordered Star Platinum to unscrew the 4 bolts from the coupler. Then it didn't take much for Jotaro to jump on the other side. Pulling out the 4 bolts, the coupler of Satanic Coupler broke down, separating the locomotive from the passenger car. From the speaker arose the desperate screams of Absalom. The locomotive of Satanic Coupler stopped with a turnabout. On the opposite side there was a passenger car, in which were Joestar and the others, and that had drifted apart from the locomotive, changing appearance. At this point it wasn't a stand anymore. It was rather like a lizard that had its tail cut off. In a flash it disappeared, leaving behind an amalgamation of steel beams, Joestar, Abdul, and Kakyoin. Jotaro! Joestar and the others, smiling and amazed, rushed towards Jotaro, who was supporting himself on the sand with his hands, panting. You saved us, Jotaro, said Abdul. It was an outstanding battle. I'm amazed beyond words. I would have never thought about such a sly move. You're really my grandson. In you flows the blood of the Joestar family. Joseph rubbed his cheek against Jotaro's. You know I can't stand these speeches, Grandpa, said Jotaro, roughly pushing him away. And it's not over yet. Absalom and Michal are in perfect shape. Joestar and the others became tense again and glanced at the coupler. During this time, Absalom and Michal were in the driver's cabin, speechless and paralysed by the shock. He got helped by the dog for a second time. Now I finally understood. That piece of trash is worth less than the animal, said Absalom with a hoarse voice. Pale and damp with sweat, he'd been hit in the nape by the 4 bolts that Star Platinum had unscrewed. Michal, you have to use Dark Mirage, he said with a loud voice, without stemming the blood spilling from his wounds. Michal's body trembled, as if suffering an electrical shock. Activate it! I said activate your Dark Mirage! Then get off the train and deal with those bastards! Michal took 1 or 2 steps back. In her eyes you could read a slight perplexity. Absalom gripped her by the shoulders and shouted desperately. Did you hear me or not, Michal? We can't reconcile with the desert anymore, nor with the civilized world. There's no more shelter for us on Earth. There's no other place where we can live, except the new world that Lord Dio's created for us. We have to kill them now. We have to show our devotion to Lord Dio, or there won't be any future for us. Absalom's honest look got lost in Michal's watering eyes. She silently nodded. Right at that instant, the mirages started to appear on the horizon. The vital energy of Dark Mirage slowly flowed inside Michal's body. In the sky echoed a rumble similar to that of a jet formation. On the desert, instead, a rain of objects seemed to want to encircle Jotaro and his friends. They immediately paled, but at that point, the materializing mirage parts had filled the sky. Huge cylindrical petroleum cisterns, factories, an entire office district, chimney stacks, a swarm of parts that rained down consecutively from the sky, following the same pattern of the previous day. Even this time, logic was not taken into consideration, and this made possible the realization of a large-scale industrial zone, in which ended both Satanic Coupler and Jotaro and his friends. The oblique chimney stacks, the capsized factories, and the piled-up oil cisterns, however, didn't bother their souls anymore. A nightmare like that would have put to test the psychological stability of anyone, and, after all, the role of the Mirage City was exactly that of pushing men on the brink of madness. But by now, having discovered the trick, there wouldn't have been the same psychological consequences of last time. The Mirage City was Satanic Coupler's battlefield, but that irrational aspect didn't constitute an insurmountable obstacle for Jotaro and his friends anymore. We should think about some countermeasure, said Joestar, confident. Don't forget Satanic Couplers able to enter buildings. They're upside down, sure, but they are still buildings. It'll be easier to fight if we bring this into a world where we can use some common sense.
Jotaro and the others, in agreement with Joestar's words, fled towards the industrial area, and once again began to patrol the surroundings. In the meantime, Satanic Coupler, not following their tracks, brought to the max the diesel engine.
Let's begin,
he said with an evil sneer. Once he took the injured boy to the village, Polnareff headed over one more time to the battlefield, and having reached less than a kilometre away, he noticed the Mirage city.
Shit, it happened again!
In less than 10 minutes he'd already reached the border. Looking at it that way from the desert, he felt yet again how unnatural it was. He had the exact same feeling from when he met Satanic Coupler in the sandstorm, and namely that it had been taken and put there, incoherently, without any correlation and balance towards the neighbouring scenery. And that exact feeling was, as it had been for Satanic Coupler, the irrefutable proof of how much the city was a trap. But even if aware, it couldn't be avoided. Polnareff, without hesitation, rushed inside the city. It was silent and gloomy, almost as a tomb. This caused a big sense of apprehension in Polnareff. Is Jotaro okay? And Joestar and the others? If they're alive, where are they? Is the battle over? If it isn't, where are they fighting? 1,000 doubts crossed Polnareff's mind without an answer. The only certain thing was that the Mirage City existed, but this would also mean that the girl Michal was still alive.
Jotaro! Jotaro!
He yelled at the top of his lungs. His voice ricocheted emptily, losing itself in that industrial area, unconcerned by any construction rules, almost like they had been wooden blocks piled by a kid.
Jotaro! Mr. Joestar! Kakyoin! Abdul!
Repeatedly calling the names of his companions, Polnareff turned the corner of a factory built with its roof below. At that instant his step halted suddenly. On the road there was a tremendous quantity of blood, so much that a puddle had formed. The blood hadn't still dried out, therefore it should have been fresh. Polnareff didn't know if it belonged to the enemy or his companions. The fact remained, however, that whoever had lost that pool of blood had moved with an ongoing hemorrhage. The stains on the path, indeed, signalled that they were heading towards the entrance of the gatehouse. Polnareff shattered the door with a kick and entered the building. The spots passed through the corridor, climbed up the stairs and reached the second floor, and continued again through the hallway. Polnareff followed them while looking around carefully. At some point in front of a door at the end of the corridor, the stains disappeared. The handle was soiled with blood, though. Polnareff rotated the handle and slowly opened the door. The room seemed an abandoned conference hall. The foldable chairs and the tables of a meeting had been placed in the corner. All 4 windows were open, and the curtains, floor-length, gently hit against the frames, moved by the wind. The horizon line from which started the Mirage appeared there in the foreground, without buildings and chimney stacks obstructing the view. The stains formed again a puddle at the centre of the room, but then stopped. Polnareff hurried towards the pool of blood and was left dumbfounded.
What's the meaning of this? Did the bleeding guy just disappear from here?
He looked around, but there wasn't anyone, only the curtains that lightly moved because of the wind. Polnareff clenched his fists, perplexed. He then felt his palm was slippery, from the blood that stuck to it when he grasped the door handle. He observed his palm carefully. This is not blood. This is red paint.
Damn, it's a trap!
The moment in which Polnareff uttered this frantic scream, a myriad of shining lights started to whirl in the Mirage visible from outside the window.
Ah!
It was a series of new mirages that were materializing. Countless petroleum cisterns were materializing.
Is this the work of Michal? Is her stand making new city parts?
Without a doubt, it was all the work of Dark Mirage. There is only a small detail. Michal didn't use the petroleum cisterns as new parts of the city. She used them as a weapon. The cisterns whirled at high speed towards the Mirage City, beginning to burn bright red from the friction with the atmosphere. And then, unbelievably, the cisterns ran through the 4 windows of the conference room, one after the other, attacking Polnareff like a meteor shower.
Gah!
Each one of them was about 20 centimetres in diameter.
Polnareff threw himself face down on the ground, but the petroleum cisterns, already turned into fireballs, exploded consecutively against the walls, spraying in the air the aflame petrol. In a short time, the floor became a blazing field, and Polnareff, trying to dodge the threat of the fireballs, came to a point where he couldn't move anymore. He was at the centre of a pyre. Am I dreaming this? Just the materializing mirages are a nightmare, but even the size of them is so incoherent. Dark Mirage was apparently able to freely modify the Mirage's scale when they materialized. Of course, in the case of teleportation or telekinesis, the weight and dimensions of the objects involved cannot be modified. However, Dark Mirage's ability is to materialize objects that don't exist in reality. Since they don't really exist, Michal can change them at will, and their size was at her discretion. When Polnareff noticed the flock of spinning cisterns in the Mirage, it was too late. At this point, the fireballs had broken through the 4 windows of the conference hall, hitting the target. They blasted away energetically, chasing for every corner of the room after Polnareff, who in vain searched for an escape route from that hell. One of them exploded right above his head. His face was drenched in a huge quantity of fuel, just the time of emitting a sharp cry of pain, and then he turned into a human torch. When Polnareff got himself into this irremediable trouble, Jotaro, Joestar, Abdul and Kakyoin were investigating the changes of Satanic Coupler. It would be a harder fight than expected. They were now 1 building away from Polnareff at the 3rd floor of a factory management building, stuck in the middle of a 200 metres long corridor. The shape of Satanic Coupler couldn't be found anywhere, but with its unreal speed, it had been able to inflict wounds to all 4 of them anyway, with the needles that protruded from the surface. Among other things, the injury to Joestar's left arm was particularly deep, but it wasn't spilling blood. It spilt oil. That arm had Joestar's artificial hand.
Damn! I can't move the index! The mechanisms must be damaged. Now how will I blow my nose?
Shh! Listen, it's coming again, said Kakyoin, interrupting the words of Joestar. The hollow and deep sound seemed out of a subway inside a tunnel. Jotaro and the others, standing stiff, started focusing carefully.
It's coming. It's coming,
murmured Joestar, damp with sweat.
But from where?
Satanic Coupler knocked down the walls and swung vociferously. It was exactly 10 metres behind Jotaro and the others, and as a reflex they leapt forward.
Emerald Splash!
Kakyoin, staggering from the force of the attack, released Hierophant Green, which in turn emanated from its wrist a flurry of destructive energy made of emeralds, but those scattered in the air. Satanic Coupler, after crossing the hallway, had dug a tunnel in the opposite wall of its horns and, bolting at the speed of 500 kilometers per hour, had gone through it, dodging the attack and leaving intact its metallic convoy. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Coupler's 20 metres of length crossed the less than 10 metres wide corridor rather than running along it. The train went from one tunnel to another, and crossing the 2 holes dug in the walls to its surface, managed to travel the whole hallway in a 1/10 of a second. Like this, all the attacks of Jotaro and his companions inexorably ended up lost in the air. Satanic Coupler, instead, in that split second, was able to launch any attack. Rather, it was sufficient for it to move into their direct proximity to run over them.
We must be quick to avoid it. It's too dangerous. It's better not to take reckless decisions,
said Joestar, breaking out in a cold sweat.
Wasn't it you, Gramps, who said it's easier to fight if you bring this into a world where you can use common sense? Tell me, what do you call common sense about this? Said Jotaro. The buildings themselves are magnificently common sense. What's irrational is that guy who's perfectly digging through the corridor. Don't tell me he's using the front horns for it. Did you really think those things were only useful to intimidate us? Why, what do you think? Yelled Joestar, losing his temper. Anyway, it's running at a supersonic speed and, using the horns as a pneumatic drill, it blows to pieces the walls of the concrete buildings as if they were crackers.
Abruptly, Coupler passed along the corridor in front of them. Jotaro and the others crouched down in shock.
It was a mistake to come to this hallway, said Abdul. With this width, if it shows up right next to us, we can't avoid it. We should remain in wide spaces. Sorry, Joestar lowered his gaze apologetically. This was all my idea. I never thought he'd break through the walls to attack us. In The corridor, we would only need to watch the front and back, or I'll quickly run. It's coming back! Yelled Kakyoin, interrupting Jelstar's sentence. Satanic Coupler kept running impetuously like an enraged bull. Once more it leapt out from the walls, ending up just right in front of the eyes of Jotaro and his friends. Kakyoin was disfigured by one of his quills. In a heartbeat, a myriad of fierce flames scattered out of Magician Red's mouth, but these didn't even reach Satanic Coupler, protected by its shockwave.
Kakyoin, everything all right? Asked Jotaro, rushing to his aid. It's just a scratch. We're trapped like rats. We'll end up being hit. We have to get out of this hallway quickly.
But, said Joestar, the rooms on the other side of the corridor are narrower than the corridor itself. It would be even more dangerous.
I get it. Then we need to leave this corridor and flee towards a wider space.
Exactly. Even if after that it would be even more risky. Once we start running, we should be very careful. Even the smallest sound of steps could be fatal to us. After all, dodging it's impossible.
Well, where do we start? Shouted Kakyoin. This city won't vanish until dusk. Do you think we'll be able to resist and avoid it until that moment?
Hey, but what?
Jelstar lost his voice for an instant. Satanic Coupler, with a deafening noise, swept past about 50 meters away from them.
Abdul, began Jotaro, do you think he's attacking to pinpoint our location?
Now that you mention it, the attacks seem to lack accuracy, replied Abdul. Too many useless charges. Maybe he's doing it on purpose to torment us, but does he even have the ability to see through walls? Even a poor marksman will hit the target with enough shots, so there's a high chance he's just randomly charging over and over again.
I've decided. There's only one way to escape.
Joestar and the others became serious, waiting for Jotaro to finish his phrase.
Let's run, and hope we won't bump into him. What? Are you crazy?
Joestar, head in his hand, signalled a no.
There's no time to argue. The probability that it will run us over is high.
Jotaro, from the floor, sprang into action and started running with all he had. Joestar and the others followed suit. Satanic Coupler zoomed for the place where the gang had stood up until then, disappearing through the wall.
That was close.
In the meantime, the group, trying to keep their cool while Satanic Coupler rushed through the corridor multiple times, ahead and behind them, managed to run through the 100 or so meters and reach the stairwell. Satanic Coupler, coming out of the wall, seemed to have caught sight of them. Thus it began to hunt them, destroying the corridor.
Surely there'll be a warehouse on the ground floor, said Abdul, looking behind. It's better to go there as soon as possible if we want to avoid him.
They ran down the stairs and rushed straight to the storehouse. Only by avoiding him we'll be able to calmly find a solution, said Kakyoin.
I wish we could stop him even for a moment, mumbled Jotaro. Why do you say this, Jotaro? Responded Joestar after hearing his words. If he stopped, even for a second, I could defeat him with Star Platinum. What? Think before you open your mouth! Joestar shouted loudly. Silver Chariot!
Polnareff, with his body half engulfed in flames, mustered his last breath of vital energy left and freed Silver Chariot into the air. This one, in turn, suddenly drew his sword, aiming the tip towards Polnareff, began shaking it, brushing against him. The saber's flare pulse painted a shiny arch around Polnareff, and abruptly the flames that were enveloping him moved away. Silver Chariot, adhering to Polnareff's body, collapsed to the ground without hurting him.
My swordsman is truly wonderful.
The consequences on Polnareff's physique were enormous. Half his body was burned, and even his silver hair, of which he was rather proud, had been dramatically scorched. However, he didn't have time to catch his breath, since the oil cisterns still whirled in the mirage beyond the window, and were about to launch the third and fourth wave of attacks.
Aye, give me a break!
Silver Chariot, standing in front of Polnareff, was concentrically swinging its sabre like a windmill against the attacks of the mini-cisterns. Some of them exploded, and with the spurts of petrol, nourished a sea of flames. The conference hall began to be enveloped in black smoke. I must stay calm, thought Polnareff. My safety is in Silver Chariot's hands, but I must think about countermeasures in any case. First, the stance position. I absolutely have to find where Michal is. I'm unable to attack when I don't know where the enemy is. Are there no traces? Any particular hint that might reveal the position of Michal's stand? Nothing at all. There isn't anything anywhere. Well, guess I'll have to figure it out by the characteristics of her stand. The things I know about her stand are three. It possesses the power of making mirages tangible, it can operate without the mirages, and lastly, it can operate if the mirage is not visible to the naked eye from its position, for example, like when we're in the sandstorm. Therefore, excluding the first and the second, we're left with the third. The mirage can be visible from any place, outside and inside the city. I can't comb from corner to corner, even because it would be hard to get out of this burning room. The door's already covered in flames. But there's one strange thing that has been bothering me for a while now, which is why I haven't left the room yet. The aim of the oil systems that attacked me is incredibly good. I survived by a hair thanks to Silver Chariot, otherwise I would have been certainly overwhelmed by the flames. A human being lacking a stand surely wouldn't have survived. Maybe she sees all of my movements. Yeah, but where's she watching from? Definitely not from outside. Outdoors there's an infinity of mirages, and with the skyscrapers and the dark smoke, she wouldn't really be able to discern the movements here inside. Then, she must be somewhere in this room. Where? Where? She can see me with the naked eye, so there must be a spot from where she's also able to pick up the mirages. Oh! After having analysed the interior of the room, Polnareff suddenly fixed his gaze. His eyes had become stuck to the left side of one of the 4 windows. The curtain attached to the framework didn't flutter. The others flapped like crazy, fed by the flames. Over there, instead, it seemed there was a person. There she is! Silver Chariot, together with Polnareff, unsheathed its sword with a dash and, dodging the flames, pointed it towards the curtain. Well, there was something. Polnareff actually felt Silver Chariot brush her body with its sword. While they were hearing the insane roar of the reels, Jotaro and the others carried on with their dash towards the warehouse. Do we really have a plan? Because if we stopped him for a second, I could destroy it. You still insist? We'll never be able to attack it this way. When he stops, the shockwave also disappears. It's pretty straightforward. Besides, old man, you can be the one to stop him, added Jotaro, annoyed at Joestar's reply. Gotcha! Trains push their wheels against the track with their own weight, which causes friction for them to run. We need to get rid of that friction. Anything's fine. Your old man Cunning should come up with something. Leave it to me! We won't fail a second time! From Abdul's shoulders emerged Magician's Red's half-bust that fueled its flames against the iron door of the warehouse. When it ended up liquefied, Jotaro and the others rushed inside, scattering left and right, letting Satanic Coupler pass through, since it had followed their trails. After rushing for 50 meters, Satanic Coupler broke into a sharp curve, swerving around the group in circles, surrounding them. Let's not escape! Let's stay here! Following Joestar's indications, Jotaro and the others didn't move any further, but turned their backs to each other to form a circle and prepare themselves for the coupler's attack. Little by little, the diameter narrowed and it got closer and closer to them, but they continued to remain still. The next move, whatever it was, would be crucial. They needed to calmly wait for Satanic Coupler's arrival. And so you all dug your own graves, from the speaker echoed Absalom's voice. I warned you. Your stand's attacks aren't worth a thing in the face of Satanic Coupler, and even if among you there's Star Platinum, of which Jojo is very proud of, you'll never be able to inflict even a scratch. You haven't recovered yet with the other day's fight. Your powers have run out, which means the winner will be me, Absalom! Suddenly, Satanic Coupler cut inward at a steep angle, launching the attack on the group, which quickly dispersed in all directions. Move! He's not giving up! Satanic Coupler entered in a turnabout, sliding on the floor. On impulse, Joestar freed Hermit Purple with its thorny vines from his left wrist and deliberately let it envelop his arm, which ended up being severed at the elbow's height. At this point, the artificial arm had been snapped in half. Mr. Joestar, what have you done? Cried Abdul.
I didn't enjoy the humiliation of being a prisoner without doing anything. This is the result of one night of thinking.
Satanic Coupler re-entered with a turnabout. Its wheels lost power, and a moment later halted completely.
Now!
Joestar hurled towards it the artificial arm, dripping it with oil. This got caught in the gap between the front wheels and the rails, and a huge amount of oil strewn across the tracks ran up, getting splattered in an instant by Satanic Coupler's rush. With a screech, the front wheels were out of order, and the evaporated oil caused a white smoke. Jotaro and the others opened their eyes wide. Joestar's move had an amazing effect. While Satanic Coupler's engine ran at full throttle, the wheels were skidding on the oil, bringing it to a full stop.
Well, regarding my artificial arm, it's packed full of a macromolecular synthetic oil, recently developed by the Speedwagon Foundation, of which I'm an advisor. The quality of this lubricating oil is the best in the world.
Joestar looked at Jotaro straight in the eyes.
Then, what do you propose, Jotaro?
I'm going to beat the shit out of him.
That's enough for me,
Jotaro said with complete frankness.
Oh no! My grandson's so simple-minded!
Leaving Joestar to struggle with this letdown, Jotaro hurried towards Satanic Coupler, shouting at the top of his lungs. In response, Star Platinum was released, its eyes anticipating a bloodbath. The two fists in a flash concentrated a pale, vital energy.
Why is Satanic Coupler not moving? Why?
Disregarding Absalom's confused state, Star Platinum went around to Satanic Coupler's side. Then, it struck with all it had, like machine gun shots, aiming at the underside where all the engine components were exposed. The flurry of fists emanated an incredible destructive energy that precisely hit the target, pulverizing everything that gave form to Satanic Coupler.
Get it now,
shouted Abdul. Animal or machine, no matter how much pride they take in their honesty, the underside is always surprisingly fragile, stagnant with hatred as diesel locomotives as well. Jotaro's plan is simple and effective. Star Platinum didn't give up and toppled Satanic Coupler on its side to better launch its storm of blows. It threw the fists on the exposed lower part and did its best to destroy everything without leaving any trace of the original shape. A cry, then Star Platinum, fearlessly leaning backwards, hit the exact centre of the lower part of Satanic Coupler. Along the whole train convoy tracks started to appear, then the siren echoed with a yell. Jotaro and the others, stunned, watched Satanic Coupler shatter into 1,000 pieces, disappearing bit by bit. In the meantime, hidden behind the curtain of the conference hall, Michal had been struck by a single blow from Silver Chariot's sabre and fallen on the floor. Alongside Michal's defeat, even the imposing Mirage city dissolved in the desert like a cloud. 6 men, a woman and a dog were lying on the sand that glistened bright under the sunlight. Every single one of them had been injured. Jojo, Joestar, Abdul, Kakyoin and Iggy had lacerations on the whole body. Polnareff had an awful burn on his chest, and Michal, fallen face down, was completely immobile. Absalom, instead, bruised and with multiple bone fractures, was vomiting blood from his mouth. At this point, the match had ended. Jotaro and the others abruptly got up, while Absalom wasn't able to even lift his chest. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't yet realized he'd been defeated. His face, darkened by dejection, wrath and hatred, had a ghastly look. He seemed another person. Good. Michal killed them all. Come on!
This is the last stop for you, said Polnareff. The game has ended. You don't even have energy left to break a toothpick.
Really? Is that so? Sneered Absalom, breaking into a cold sweat. Do you really think you defeated us? We'll stop fighting only when our hearts stop beating. Well, if you want, we can help you with that. Polnareff called Silver Chariot again. In that moment he noticed the minuscule light emanating from Absalom's body was doing something to Abdul's wounded calf. You! What the heck are you doing? Polnareff grabbed Absalom and raised him by the head. Absalom laughed brazenly. Satanic Coupler. I sent it at Abdul's body, a macroscopic Satanic Coupler. I told you it's a stand that acts by combining itself with matter. If it's combined with airborne particles, it can get very tiny. What? Polnareff and the others went serious, but then relaxed once more. Absalom, without being aware, kept blabbering proudly of his victory. The human body is structured like an underground with many tunnels, which in this case are called blood vessels. I tested this new Satanic Coupler for a while, and now I'll have it ride the flow of the veins to the heart and penetrate their walls. I told you you're in trouble, said Polnareff. We'll smash you and it'll be the end. Try it. What? Satanic Coupler's ready to let its boiler explode if the psychic contact between me and it gets interrupted. It's macroscopic, but it'll be able to open a hole in Abdul's stomach anyway. You're determined, commented Abdul. Now what will you do? Absalom turned his gaze at Polnareff and the others, as if taunting them. I own the lethal switch. I'll kill you with my hands, and we'll even be watching Satanic Coupler while it executes it. Because after having penetrated Abdul's body, I'll make it enter into every one of you. Pah! Polnareff spat on the ground, indignant, and added, You're rotten to the core. Absalom, it seems the child you hit will be saved, abruptly muttered Jotaro, who had up until then been silently staring at Absalom with an intense look. Huh? Absalom, after hearing Jotaro's words, remained stock still in astonishment, but then whispered in relief. Is that so? However, he immediately began to yell as if he were ashamed of it. What about it? I couldn't care less if that kid's alive or dead. Rather, what do we do about Abdul, Jotaro? Will you kill him yourselves, or leave Satanic Coupler to take care of him? Which is it? We chose neither. You'll be the one dying. What nonsense are you saying? Give me a good reason to be able to believe it. You're not the only one to have the power to shrink, replied the relaxed Kakyoin, interrupting Absalom's speech. The stand is the vital energy's manifestation. If you really have courage, you shouldn't shrink yourself. No way. Absalom blushed out of shame. Don't tell me even your stand's in Abdul's body. Yes, I followed you immediately. You didn't quite realize who you're dealing with. But you still haven't located Satanic Coupler's position. If you can't pinpoint it at that labyrinth, your stand's worth less than nothing. What if I rip through Abdul's heart right now? My stand, said Kakyoin, can't see, but has a very developed sense of hearing. I'd say 100 times greater than a common human being. I clearly detect the sound of Satanic Coupler running, but since I can't see it, I decided to entrust everything to Star Platinum. Kakyoin said the truth. It had an unbelievable sense of hearing, and miniaturized Hierophant Green could pick up the exact position of Satanic Coupler. It was preceding Star Platinum and ready to attack in the cardiac circulatory system. The trailer slowly approached with a steam boiler sound. It had become an old and miserable steam locomotive. That decayed train was a representation of Absalom's vital energy. Star Platinum pointed the index and middle finger of the right hand towards Satanic Coupler. Star Finger. Then they stretched directly towards the steam boiler, piercing it. Absalom was pulled backwards, rolling legs up in the air in the desert. He puked blood and, fumbling around, plummeted with a crash on the sound without any strength. Jotaro and Polnareff got closer to him cautiously. 6 months or so for a full recovery, said Jotaro, staring down Absalom. Why did you give me the coup de grace? Absalom stuttered with a raucous gaze. Jotaro, with a slightly softened tone, answered, I decided to give you the possibility to redeem yourself. Redeem myself? I don't care if you don't understand, but I just want to tell you this. In 2 weeks, the Dio you so much adore will disappear from the face of the earth, and with him even the new world you wanted to go live in peacefully. At that point, where will you and your little sister go? If you'll reconcile with your friends, maybe they'll understand you. Me and my sister? Don't worry, said Polnareff. I don't have any intention of killing the girl. I just hit her with the back of the sword Japanese style, and she fainted from the pain. Absalom looked at Jotaro, but his icy eyes didn't allow in any way to read his mind. And, right at that moment, Hey, you bastards! A myriad of men were rushing towards them, aggressively wielding pieces of wood and canes. It was the inhabitants of the village in the south, who had provided assistance to Jotaro and Polnareff. Hey, Absalom! There's Michal! But how'd you get in such bad shape? Shouted the old man, observing a moribund Absalom and simultaneously staring at Jotaro and Polnareff, who were hesitant to talk. It's rather strange now that I think about it. What the hell's happened? You said you were Absalom's friends. No, it wasn't us, Polnareff justified. But the old man seemed to not want to listen to anything else. Now I understand. Then the mirages that were visible until a moment ago, even those were your doing. You're the subjects of Baba Sabombo, the desert that they say lives in this desert. What are you blathering about? Who the hell is this Abba whatever? Hey, shut your trap! The old man's blood rushed to his head from the agitation. I won't allow it. Our Absalom and Michal are important for us. You'll be judged, all of you. Jotaro and the others fled like hell, followed closely by the villagers, which brandished canes and pieces of wood, raising a big uproar. And running through the desert, they slowly got away. Absalom, left there, watched the empty air. His worn-out face didn't let any thoughts transpire. A cheek, however, was streaked by a tear. Absalom repeated in a whisper. On the evening of the 5th day after the incident, Jotaro and the others were finally about to put their long and exhausting fight with the desert to an end. At the top of a dune, they saw that in order to reach an extended chain of rocky mountains, they needed to travel more than 10 kilometres. At the base of those mountains, there was a city surrounded by a scrub of vegetation. Judging by its dimension, it appeared that the city benefited from the advantages of progress. Jotaro and his companions moved forward with a light gait. What might be Absalom's tragedy, said Joestar, talking to Abdul. There's a thing that still doesn't persuade me. For example, his hatred. From whom, rather, from what might have it been born? From the dark side of the civilized world, replied Abdul after having thought about it. The hostile nature of the desert. Absalom himself. Dio. I don't know. Would it be too convenient to always put all the blame on Dio? At Polnareff's words, Joestar and the others burst out laughing. As one got gradually closer to the Rocky Mountains, the desert shape gained undulation. Small and big dunes followed one another, and it could be clearly seen that now the sand was mixed with rocks. Jotaro, touched lightly by a cool and damp breeze, turned around to realise how far he had travelled during those 5 days. 2 dunes rose one after the other, appearing to overlap, and in the sky a star glowed with a dazzling light. It seemed he was looking at the illustration depicted in The Little Prince. Those 2 panoramas were like 2 drops of water. Could it really be it? Thought Jotaro. Should I really be finding that landscape for the 2nd time so easily? Is it possible that this landscape is simply scattered all over the desert? I thought that the place I saw the other day really was the scenery of The Little Prince. I believed it from the bottom of my heart. Then, how come? I'm sure that in the book it was written as if this landscape was unique to the world.
That's why when I saw it yesterday, I thought I'd made a great discovery. Shouldn't have turned around. If I hadn't turned around, I wouldn't have seen that landscape for the second time. If I hadn't turned around, I would have kept believing I'd found the scenery of the Little Prince, even if that landscape can be found everywhere. Jotaro felt a slight disappointment. He was angry at the harsh reality of it all. In the world, those who ignore reality are the happiest. If you don't want to spoil the desires you've grown in your heart, you might as well ignore reality and be happy anyway. For the first time, he had the feeling of having understood the words of the old man, and simultaneously, he was able to even understand Absalom's hell. "Hey, Jotaro! What's gotten into you? Get moving!" From the foot of the hill, Polnareff's voice was heard. The faint flare of the sunset slowly began to dye the sky red.
I see you standing in the alleys and the hallways. Wait a second, you're gone now. I run to touch you, but you vanish through the doorway. And oh, how hard it is to live without you. I love everything about you. Now I know you're really gone, but my imagination is so strong that I see you coming into view. And your face is telling me that you, oh yeah, oh, wanna be by my side. Oh yeah, oh, now it's finally time. Wait a second. That's all you are to me. Something I only see. So I keep walking through the alleys and the hallways. Where are you? I keep remembering the kissing in the doorways. The cartoon, how it all comes back to me. The movies every